It's Joe, your faithful host and co-founder of Command Control Power, the longest-running Apple consulting podcast. In case you missed our birthday, we just celebrated our 10th anniversary this summer. For 10 years, we've been getting together each and every week to bring you epic tales of tech support and business management, and I'm pretty sure we've saved a lot of people a ton of time by sharing our struggles and solutions. Starting now, we're shifting our focus to the Patreon community. That means the newest shows will be posted primarily on Patreon. How do you get the latest episodes? Visit commandcontrolpower.com and click on support. Pledge monthly, and you can instantly subscribe to the weekly patron-only episodes right in your favorite podcast app. If you already support us on Patreon, log in there to get your special link and subscribe to the patron-only show so you don't miss anything. Here on the public show, we'll be featuring classic episodes hand-selected for you from our catalog of over 500 episodes, along with occasional new episodes too. And remember, we're regularly releasing new content on Patreon, where you can join our community of supporters starting at just $15 per month, giving you access to the freshest content. We feature dozens of exclusive shows on Patreon where we speak a little more freely about how we make business decisions, navigate client relationships, manage our employees, and sometimes deal with mistakes and difficulties too. Plus, as a patron, you receive access to our entire back catalog where you can revisit classic episodes and learn from colleagues we've interviewed who've shared their own best practices. Visit commandcontrolpower.com and click support to pledge monthly on Patreon. We'd really appreciate your support, and we're confident your business will benefit from the wisdom of the community we've gathered there. Thanks for listening, and we hope you enjoy this episode of Command Control Power.
Today, we are very pleased to be joined by Richard Wingfield, friend of the show, repeat guest. Richard is head geek of Envision Design based in Houston, Texas. Richard, thanks for coming.
Hey, guys. Thanks for having me. Appreciate being here, and appreciate you guys scheduling around the Astros playoff schedule.
Yeah, we did that just for you, my friend.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
We all moved our stuff around, and now Joe couldn't even make it because of you. See what happens?
That's right. That's right. Well, priorities.
Well, I'm glad your Astros are hanging in there. I'll be rooting for them because my Mets are out. So
that's right.
I'm done.
When were they out? Was that mid-season? Sorry.
Last year.
Okay.
Last season. We had gotten to talking, as we do a few times over. We periodically keep in contact. We chat via email, and you're always so helpful in terms of your contributions. It was a recent episode that we were talking about, just to dive right in. We were chatting about Synologies and RAID configurations, and I got beat up a little bit on Slack about it, I recall. But you also had some personal stories to share from your experiences that could be helpful for other listeners to hear, really protect themselves against future considerations with clients when they push back on cost.
I told you guys, as often happens, I'm listening to the podcast while I'm driving, and there are occasions where I'm yelling at you and the car and the windshield about ranting about, no, don't do that. Don't fall into that trap. And that episode was especially hit that trigger for me, a bit of a trauma that we had a number of years back. I hit you guys up and said, hey, I have a cautionary tale to tell about not pushing back hard enough against clients when they don't want to see the forest for the trees and they're trying to be really cheap. And I think the discussion on the podcast was at a low level about entry-level Synologies and whether you have single or dual disk redundancy. And what I'm yelling in the car is, that extra disk is only a couple of $100. Why are the clients even, why are we as consultants even allowing the client to have that conversation, to just say, nope, this is best practice and this is what we recommend. So I know that doesn't only happen with your consultants, it happens with ours. And I've talked to a number of other ACNs at ACEs and different places, and it happens all the time. So I thought I could share a difficult story and how we learned our lesson the hard way, and then maybe some of the listeners don't have to learn a lesson the way we did.
Overall, that's how I learn. I've said this before, but on this show, I've gotten to be so much better at what I do because I hear my own mistakes and hear other mistakes as well. And that's how I figure myself out. I make mistakes. I appreciate you being so open and candid about some things that you run into that you realize now, okay, I'm not going to make that same mistake again, but perhaps I can help somebody else not do it before me.
happy to share. It's taken a couple of years to get over this, so I wouldn't have been able to share it earlier. Too many tears and cuddled up in a ball in the corner. But if you guys are ready, I'll just start dive in with what we had.
And I think it might be helpful just to frame it for most of the listeners and for Sam and myself is like, what is your normal conversation? How does that go with a client, steering them away from single disk redundancy and wanting to expand out the disk pack so you've got a lot more redundancy in whatever multiple RAID array you have from a Synology? So take us through it like a typical presentation or conversation, how that would go and where things kind of got off the rails there a little bit with this one particular client.
I'll go all the way back to some stories I shared at the MacTech conference speaking this year when they were in Houston about, hey, this started all the way back when, was it 2011 when Apple announced the end of the Xserve? We saw the writing on the wall and started looking at what servers we were going to use instead. And so we started using Synologies all the way up to today where we talk to the clients about, hey, yes, there's cloud and all this other stuff, but Synology is private cloud. It's your data, and you want to have control over your data. We don't want to, well, I have Dropbox. I don't need a server and all that kind of stuff. And so we can have that conversation a separate time about how we position and market servers and Synologies and why we have those in place. Our rule of thumb these days is it's got to be a plus system. We don't ever do anything smaller than a 4-bay system so that we can have dual disk redundancy. The plus systems are the ones that all support BTRFS, so you can do rollbacks. So that's kind of where we start. And almost all of our clients are using the Synology, at least one Synology. Some clients have multiple ones, but their primary Synology is typically a file server, and it may be synced with Dropbox and other cloud services, but that's their primary data. And we're going to keep their primary data on that server. And then we have, in a broad context, we have about 40 or 50 terabytes worth of Synology storage in a data center in Austin because it is out of the hurricane zone, but within driving distance. And we back up all of our client data to our servers and our rack in Austin.
Wow. Interesting.
And that's, by the way, when we're talking to other consultants, that is source of income, right? We're like, hey, we require you to have backup, and we're going to provide some of it because if we get a flood or a hurricane or a fire or a theft or whatever it is, great, we've got that backup with some big third party in the cloud, but you're an architect with 6 terabytes worth of data. We can't pull that. And they got to put it on whatever. And so we can drive to Austin and get that data, or we can just spin it up and give you some cloud access to that data while the floodwaters recede or you move into a new building or whatever the big issue is.
Jerry, would you be willing to host a data center in your mansion? And we
in the castle?
Yeah. I mean,
in
that
one
would
of
be
the wings
wonderful.
of the castle? Sure.
That's
Extra source of income for everybody.
That's right. Each end of the bar in the kitchen, you just put in a rack.
That's right.
And then you don't need the vent fan in the kitchen. You just got those servers venting all the air all the time. So
that is interesting, though, Richard. So are you using Synologies in the data center as well?
Absolutely. Rack mount 12 bays with expansions. I think we have 3 12-bay Synologies. One of them has a 12-bay expansion, and we're getting ready to put a 4th one in. Some of those are specific to a client. Like we have a big photography client, so they need to store a lot of data. So that original 12-bay Synology was here in Houston, synchronized all their data the first time. Then we took it to Austin, and now the backups are just incremental because we couldn't have backed that much data up over the internet to start with. When we have clients like that, where they want their own private server instead of ours, all that data will get synced here first, and then we drive to Austin, put the rack in, and then from that point forward, they're just doing incrementals and updating over the internet.
And do you keep your costs in comparison with any of the big services, or do you just decide on your numbers separately from that in terms of what the client is going to pay per gig or
we
whatever?
Are more expensive than all the big services, and we tell them that's because we are taking care of it. There is human time. It is drivable. So I think I'd have to look now because I'm only the boss, right? I don't know everything, right? I do what they tell you to do. I hire people smarter than me, but I think we charge, depending on how much data they're doing, how long they've been a client, how much we love them, between 5 and 10 cents per gig per month.
Okay.
And we also tell them that helps us. Yes, we're more expensive. You get somebody else's like, oh, it's, $25 a year for all the data you can store. Well, great. And you can't get that back. And we used to, I know Crash Plan's come up on here before. We used to run a Crash Plan server in Austin. But we switched to, once we had all of our clients using Synology, we just started putting Synologies in the data center rather than trying to run separate Crash Plan servers. So we tell them that data's there, it's drivable. On the positive side, we had a client. No matter where you are in the country, you saw all the fun of Hurricane Harvey a couple of years ago. It was in the news everywhere. Mm-hmm. We had a client who didn't get touched at all by Harvey. And we had other clients who didn't have power for 3 weeks and all kinds of stuff. Nothing happened with Harvey. And then 2 weeks after all the floodwaters had receded and cities getting back to normal, a maintenance person, they're an industrial client, a maintenance person was working on one of the machines, had a spark happen and burned the building to the ground.
Oh my goodness.
We had all their data in Austin. We didn't even try to recover it and bring it back. We said, hey, what do you need right now? We unarchived some of their data and just put it up as a SharePoint, and they had cloud access. The day after the fire, they're at the Apple stores getting new machines. People are working from home. And so we just restored as much data as they needed to work. And then we also did a big restore, got a new Synology, took that to Austin, restored everything there, and then brought that back. But they were able, that within 48 hours, their people had new machines and were working on some of their data and working from home.
That's unbelievable, Richard.
Yeah. So that's the good story. That's not the story I came to tell.
Right. Well, let's start us off on a positive note.
Right.
So not to give us a typical blow-by-blow or in terms of your presentation, Richard, but in brief, the short elevator pitch on normally how you take your client through getting a Synology for a file server and then talk specifically about how you pitch some redundancy.
So what we will typically do with the client is, let's say it's a new client. We'll go in and say, let's look at what they have and how much, we'll find out how much data they have. It could be a small law firm where they're like, oh no, everybody's got everything on their own computer and nothing's backed up. And so we're going to each lawyer because they have their own projects. And anyway, at some point we find out how much data they have. And we say, okay, that we need that much storage. Right. But we are going to do 3 tiers of backup, and we're going to have backup that is hardware redundancy, and that's where the Synology is going to come in. And then we're going to have backup that is incremental backup. So somebody screwed up a spreadsheet on Friday. Can we go back to Thursday's version? So for us, that's HyperVault on that local machine. Okay. So it's not quite double the amount of storage, but you get the idea. We're going to have your file server, and then we're going to do a local HyperVault that will let you go, oh, I need a quick restore the backup of the file that was last Thursday or whatever it is. And then the third tier is going to be the offsite disaster recovery backup that's going to be on our Synology in Austin outside of the hurricane zone. And then we'll tell them, now let's go back to tier 1 with the hardware redundancy. If you can't have downtime at all, we'll look at a Synology high availability where you're going to buy 2 servers that are an exact match so that if the logic board dies on one, the other server picks up before you even know it. We have very few clients that want to spend at that level. Oh, well, downtime's okay if it's a day or whatever. Then the other part of that is we're always going to do dual disk redundancy because if one of those hard drives fails, we can just pop in a new hard drive and it will rebuild the system. Mm-hmm. The reason we're going to do dual disk redundancy is sometimes that rebuild, not going to be downtime for you, Mr. Client. You're going to get to keep working, but it's going to be doing something in the background for 12 to 18 to 30 hours, depending on how much data and all that kind of stuff. If we have another drive failure while that rebuild is happening, we want to have that second disk redundancy. And depending on whether they're putting 2 terabyte disk in or 6 to 10 terabyte disk, it's still in the few $100s for that extra disk. So that's where I started with the conversation that you guys were having about some client who didn't want to spend the money, right? So does that make sense, Jerry?
Sam, did you have something to say?
I was going to say, since Joe's not here, I think it was one of Joe's clients. We'll just put it on him.
Right. Well, I've had those clients too. And at some point they're like, well, I don't know. It's like, no, we're not going to do this, because when it goes wrong, you're going to come back to us and say, why didn't you tell me? And then I'm going to go look at the documentation that shows where I told you. And then you're still going to say, yeah, but you knew better. So you should have really told me that was a dumb thing.
Yeah, it'll always come back to you.
Which is where this other story of cautionary tale and grief ends up, because I learned that lesson the hard way. I mean, I had documentation of what the client told us. And in the end, they were like, yeah, but you should have known better. You should have known better than, yes, you told me and I didn't listen, but you should have told me harder. Right. So.
Right. So right. We've heard of clients, we've heard of ACNs and consultants coming up with a presentation where they have a sheet that the client, if the client doesn't decide to do best practice, where they sign off and they basically say that we are agreeing not to do this, and you've got a signature on paper.
Yep, and we have done that a couple of times since then, where we've said, oh, well, great. Well, here's this document, and the Reader's Digest, the document says, you've told me what to do. I've decided to be dumb and not, or cheap or whatever, and not do that. And somewhere in that document written by my attorney is hey, we're going to hold Envision harmless for anything that happens from you guys not following what we told you to do.
And do you do
and the
that?
hold harmless? Yeah, we have done it before. And the hold harmless, often they're like, oh, you're serious? Well, no, I'm not signing that. Let's buy the extra hard drive or whatever it is. Right. So
it's pretty awesome.
So are you emotionally ready to divulge to the audience what happened to you? I mean, I know it's been a while, but.
Oh, it is burned in my brain. So I know the story. I don't have to, it's not hard to pull back. It's just hard to pull back without the tears. But so long story, thanks guys. Long story short, it was a 12-bay Synology in this architecture office. So that Synology was not their primary server. That's where they archived everything. Because if you've ever worked for architects or graphic designers or any of those people, nothing can ever be thrown away. They want instant access to every project, job, design they've ever done. And so we're not keeping that stuff on their high availability server. We're moving it off to the archives. But at any point they want to go back to that project they did 10 years ago and call up a drawing, they can. So this happened to the 12-bay archive server. It was a hardware problem that led to a software bug that was compounded with human error from someone from Envision. And in the end, it was almost $12,000 worth of fee for drive savers in California and 2 months worth of work to recover the data. And what we got back was almost unusable. So the data was recovered, but not really in a usable format.
Wow. Boy.
So,
but how did you get there?
So the process was we had a 12-bay dual disk redundancy, all the stuff we're supposed to do.
Right.
It's having a drive failure, so we pop a drive and put a new drive in. It's doing its rebuild, and then it won't reboot. We get on the phone with Synology trying to figure it out, and they go, "Oh, well, no big deal. It must be that the OS was on the drive and the OS got corrupt." So we basically did the Synology equivalent of a clean install of the OS. Mm-hmm. And they're like, "Hey, all your data is going to be fine. It's just the little partition that holds the DSM OS." So we're like, "Okay, great." So they walk us through how to do it. Synology support was wonderful. We get the new OS on there, and again, long story short, what we find out is we had to do a clean install, and I won't remember the point numbers, but basically you had to do a clean install of DSM-6 something. But that server had started on DSM-5 something and had been upgraded to 6. So something about going from DSM-5 to 6 in the configuration we had, there was a software bug when we just put DSM-6 from scratch and it's pulling old preferences for our configuration. And this is where we get to the client decided to be cheap and we let them. So what had happened was they said, hey, we're paying for that 12-bay server as our archive, but we also want it backed up offsite because we ask every client to do that. So we said the offsite backup, we're going to do a hypervault. So we have versioning. And they decided, no, that's too expensive. This is archive. Let's just do the Synology sync so we don't have to pay for extra hard drive space to save versions because it's archive. It's not live data. It's read-only. If any of the users want that data, they have to get on that server and pull it to the live server. They can't make changes. So we're not going to pay for enough storage in Austin to do incremental backups. We're just going to say whatever goes into that archive just gets synchronized up to the cloud. We said, okay, well, we'll do that, but we're only going to have it one way. It's only going to move stuff up. It's not going to move deletions or any of that thing. But it's a sync to save money on hard drives, which is why this story came to mind when you guys were talking about the client who didn't want to pay for a hard drive. So to speed up the story, then what happens is we're finding out from Synology, oh, well, your sync setup is failing because of the old one was 5, upgraded to 6. This is a clean install of 6. So one of my guys is troubleshooting it, and we're starting to get duplicate data. So he starts, oh, well, it's duplicate. I'll delete this, and then I'll try it again, and then I'll delete something else and try it again. He's working on the local machine in Houston. At some point, he realizes that the bug from the 5 to 6 upgrade is mirroring those deletions in the cloud.
Oh, God. I'm feeling a little nauseous.
Yeah. And he sees it's notifications from, like, why are we getting all these notifications from our server in Austin about all these terabytes of data that are being deleted? And we panic. We're like, just go unplug the power out of the back of that thing in the server room in Houston. Like, we need to stop this, and we don't have time to wait and find out what's going on. So then we start exploring, and there's no backups of that thing because they were cheap. That was a synchronization. So probably half of the data is gone. Thank God the internet's slow enough that it all wasn't gone. So we start looking at what to do. Well, this was pre-BTRFS file system, so we can't roll back. And they didn't want to pay for backups of their backup, and they only wanted to sync. So there's nothing there. So we talked to drive savers. And they're like, okay, well, here's what you got to do. And they send us all the instructions. We need the full 12 bays. You need to pull out every single hard drive, label them, wrap it in 3 inches of bubble wrap and ship it and all this kind of stuff. They kept that server and all those hard drives for almost 2 months. We'd get updates about every 3 or 4 days. Hey, we tried to recover all the data, and there are just too many small files and this kind of thing. There's over 1 million files, and it failed. So we're gonna have to recover the data in pieces. So after 2 months, we finally get it all back. No BTRFS, so we couldn't roll back. And they're architects, so a lot of the files are CAD files. Almost all the files have no file name and no date. So we just have 0.0000001.jpg through however many million files.
Oh my God.
Sorted by file type. But you want to talk about digital needle in a haystack? Oh, you need a JPEG or a PDF from a project that was in 2010. We don't even have folders with dates on them. Just go through 500,000 PDFs and see one at a time if you can find the one you're looking for. So we get the data back from drive savers. And did I say it was about $12,000?
You did.
Yep. And the client doesn't want to hear that they told us not to do. I mean, I have documentation that they said they didn't want to pay for incremental backups. They don't want to hear that there was a hardware failure and a software bug with Synology. All they care about is that one of my guys had some user error. So we ate the full cost of that recovery. And then we get it back. So we're like, okay, how could we make this data usable? So some of them may have file names, but the bulk of the files that they need are the CAD files, not the PDFs or whatever. And they don't have file names and dates or any of that stuff. So we're like, oh, you know what? Let's take all that data that came back. It was about 6 or 8 terabytes worth of data, I think. Let's take all that data and put it on a promise RAID, plug that promise RAID into a Mac Mini, and see if Spotlight indexing will index it. So at least if they do a search and they're looking for a project name or a number, if it's in the contents of the file, maybe the Spotlight search will help. So that helped on Word and PDF files, but none of the CAD data is Spotlight searchable.
Yeah, indexable.
With the data inside the file.
Right.
So in the end, multiple months of heartache, $12,000. The data is not completely unusable, but it's probably 90% unusable because of the way it came back. And the cost to have done this properly, again, if we only got about 8, if that was a 12 bay, 2 bays are redundant, so we had 10 bays. We probably had, back in that point in time, we probably had 10 2-terabyte hard drives. Mm-hmm. But again, you guys, everybody on this call knows that you can mix and match drives or whatever. So again, I think it was probably the cost of several 3 or 4 terabyte drives to have done this properly and had an incremental hypervault backup so that when that user error happened, all we would have done is said, well, no problem, go back to Wednesday. This is archive data. Until we had this bug, all the data from on an archive server, all the data from a month ago was probably accurate. Whereas a live server, you need like day-to-day stuff. So anyway, that's my cautionary tale, and I got through it without any tears.
You could see from the client standpoint, I could think of an analogy. Let's say you had all these assembled Lego projects, and then what they got back was a big box of all the individual Lego pieces just all thrown in together in this gigantic box. You could really see how heartbreaking it not only was for you, but for the client, because, like you said, it was unusable data for the most part.
In the end, I was thrilled to pay that $12,000 to not have that client fire us. The fact that we got to keep the client was going to be my next question. Right. They've probably been a client for 10 plus years.
What was the disclosure like so that they caught wind that one of your guys was in there and operational and was manipulating the data, and then things kind of went sideways? How were they informed of that?
Because it was an archive server, it wasn't affecting their live data. Mm-hmm. But as soon as we found out what was going on, I talked to the owners of the firm and I said, hey, because they knew the hardware failure had happened because we're billing them for, hey, we got to buy a couple of hard drives because a hard drive failed on that thing. But they're used, 10 to 15 years of working with this client, they're used to, hey, something failed, we're going to get a new hard drive. You'll see a reimbursable invoice. We'll just get it off Amazon or whatever. And so they knew we were working on something because we bill them for the hard drive we bought to when it all started. So we just kind of kept them up to date with, hey, there was a problem in that hard drive that hardware recovery to a bug with Synology, and it looks like there's issues. Like, we didn't know at that point. It looks right. Like there's issues with the sync between the backup server and Austin. We're working on it. And then probably 4 or 5 days later, when we've got to go, hey, we're packing that whole server up and sending it off to California. That was a fun meeting with a keynote presentation in front of the 4 partners in the firm and 6 or 7 of the primary architects to explain over the course of an hour, here's how all this happened. Here's the decision we made. If this had happened to your primary server, we have incremental backups. Like, this wouldn't have happened. We wouldn't have had this data loss if it was the primary server, because we backed that data up differently than we decided to back up the archive data. And so we had to go through that whole presentation, and then we went through a presentation about, and now once we get that back and in place, here's how we're going to manage your archive data and back it up.
Do you regret being so forthright with the client regarding when you were doing your analysis and you found that bug where things were getting deleted in the server?
No, I'm kind of glad that we were. I mean, again, I've had this client forever, so it was the relationship was there to be pretty straightforward about what's going on. In the end, with what happened and the data we got back, I'm glad I didn't try to sugarcoat it up front. Oh, it's no big deal. We got the backups, and then to have it go the other way would have been even harder. And now to head off one of your next questions, one of the other things we do, our cost, not sent back to the client, so it's just another cost of business. We have our servers in Austin one-way backed up to Backblaze B2, and I'm the only one with the password to that. So if there's user error, it's going to be mine, and I'm going to have nobody to blame but me. So.
That's backing up the backups, as we say.
Right,
and I think there's no downside to doing something additional like that. I can't. Right. Your story, as you were telling it, my brain was just going through all my clients and thinking of, some that may not have listened to me for certain things and others. And I'm a little bit panicked right now. I got to say,
well, the other one
you start
was
thinking about those things.
Yeah, and some of it was timing. That server had been in place for a long time. So when we configured that server, BTRFS file system was not available. If we had BTRFS on there and had it configured properly, we could have rolled, even without backups, we could have rolled back the server. What's the kids' book? Series of Unfortunate Events or whatever.
Lemony Snicket's.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
Jerry, if you don't mind me piggybacking on what you said, I know where you were going in a way with that is basically giving them a window to put the onus on you.
There you go.
And yeah, I mean, you've had a relationship with them. They trust you to do the right thing and all of that. And it is a difficult, and I'm sure that presentation that you did was incredibly difficult to do. But ultimately, if you're hiding anything under the rug that could eventually come out or anything like that, I guess that's even worse, So,
and to be honest, in this situation, if it gets into a legal battle and all that kind of stuff, the bulk of the issue was caused by whatever that weird bug was, that the configuration that was made in 5 something and migrated to 6 had a bug when we went to a clean install of 6, and then the two-way sync got turned. Like, my guy didn't go turn on the two-way sync and the deletion, right? But in the end, there were humans involved, and so it was a no-win situation for everybody. And the point being, all the way back to the beginning, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, what would 4 terabyte drives have cost? Not $12,000, not loss of 10 years worth of archive data. If they could go pay that now to have all that data back, they'd be pulling the check out of their wallet immediately, cheap at twice the price kind of thing. So, and hard drives are so cheap now, we don't argue with clients about, nope, it's a 4 bay and 2 of them are redundant.
Having to do with drive savers, I've been an affiliate of theirs, and along the way gotten a check or two, and I've never really parlayed it into something really, really lucrative, although they're pretty generous with their commissions. I did have one situation where I got a pretty fat check from Drive Savers, and then they were paying out another commission, and there was a negative amount on the check that they issued me. And what happened was they rescinded the money they gave me. And I called them about it, and I was very nice. And I said, why is this? I thought this was money that was already paid to me. And they said something to the effect like, oh, yeah, well, we sent the recovered data to the client, but ultimately it was of no use to them, so we didn't end up charging them. And I thought, well, that's pretty liberal to begin with. But, and I lost my commission and, nobody called me. But
yeah.
Did you have any kind of conversation with Drive Savers, like after everything arrived and said, like, look, we got this big box of Legos and nothing's assembled and we don't know what to do with it. And it's of no use to us.
Yeah. Yeah. Here's my understanding of how all that works with Drive Savers. If they can't recover the data, they're not going to charge you. So you see the pictures of something fell in a river or the house burned down or whatever, and they show these horrible pictures and they got data off the drive, right? They don't guarantee. So all the data was there, but what made it unusable for the client was no file names and dates, right? So they recovered the data for this client, but in the end, it's not really usable for them because what they need to do is they've got 10 years worth of archives and they need to go find that particular project and a drawing or a floor plan or a rendering or whatever it is from a particular date and project number or whatever. So as far as Drive Savers is concerned, they recovered the data. I don't think they make hey, is it usable? In your case, if it was, hey, we got a bunch of files back and we could tell they were Word documents, but none of them will open because they're corrupt, then maybe that's where they go, the data's unusable. We could open every single file they recovered. We just couldn't find the ones we need without, spending months to do it. And then what we chose to do with our relationship with Drive Savers, and my hope is that's never going to be a big profit center for us, because if it is and we're recovering that much data, we're not doing our job, right? If we're having to send a lot of stuff to them. But what we do is, and it's just between us and all of our ACN friends, but there's an option where we get a 20% discount. So the client sees the original quote from Drive Savers, they bill us and we bill the client. If that original quote was $12,000, we got our 10% off that. So the client sees, hey, we spent it would have cost you $12,000 to get this back. We got 20% off that. And then we've done for some clients where we'll say, hey, we'll give you 5 or 10% off. So we're making 10% and we're giving them a 10% discount over the quote they see from Drive Savers. My hope, calling you guys up after people at the stoplight were looking at me like, what's that guy yelling at in his car by himself? But it was to say, hey, anybody that wants to tell this story now can, and go, hey, we know another ACN that cost the client, you'd say it cost the client, whoever, it cost them $12,000 and they still didn't get the data they wanted. Do you think this $300 for an extra 6 terabyte drive is worth it? Let's put that in and do what we're supposed to do, right? So
I'm definitely using that story. You're not the first person that said that you react like that in the car sometimes. So I think about it sometimes when I'm about to tell a story or say something that might aggravate somebody listening. I'm like, I wonder how many people are screaming at me right now from afar that I'm never going to know about.
I will tell you, it is, for me, it is therapeutic in that hearing you guys talk about these different client stories helps me know I'm not alone in my frustration with the client. So I'm not really yelling at you guys. I'm really yelling at all the difficult clients that we all have to deal with and going, no, say this instead.
So true.
So do you have any general hardware tips with the way you outfit these Synology boxes? Like, do you put any SSDs in them for hot data cache? And what is your preference on drives to load them up with?
We have started using all Iron Wolf drives now that Seagate decided that they didn't need to cost 3 times the price of any other drive. So we're trying now to use all Iron Wolves so that you get that extra health data in the Synology. Note, it's got to be a 4 terabyte drive or larger. If you get 2s or 3s, they don't support the extra health data. Apparently, there's an extra hardware chip or something on there that isn't economical in the smaller drive sizes. So as long as you're using 4 terabyte or greater on the Iron Wolves, you'll get the extra health data. For the higher volume clients, the other benefit of those larger systems is you can bond together multiple NICs. So if you're in a 5 or 8 base system. I know the 8 base systems for sure, you get 4 1 gigabit Ethernet ports. So you can bind all those together and kind of have 4 gigs of throughput to the server. When we had the 8 base systems for the architects and graphic designers, 2 of those drive bays would be taken up with SSD cache. The newer systems have expansion bays on them where you can, what's it called? It's an M2. You can get those SSD cache, the 2 SSD cache drives without taking up drive bays now. And those are our big ones for hardware.
So your drive of choice is the 4 terabyte Iron Wolf. And when you're getting those mSATA, what size do you get for those typically?
It depends on the client. Synology somewhere on their website has a tool where you can calculate what the best cache is. Maybe it's actually in the DSM software. I think we got 256s for the, pair, and you always have to get them in pairs because one's a read cache and one's a write cache. And then we've got another, again, that architecture firm where they just keep growing and they need more throughput. We just upgraded their servers after a number of years, and we're putting 10 gig Ethernet and putting a 10 gig switch, Ubiquiti switch in so that they can get more throughput.
So you'd have to buy all new Synology disk stations for that, correct?
There was time to upgrade. They were running out of room, and the server was getting old, so it was their servers were 3 or 4 years old. We upgraded to a model that supported the 10 gig expansion while we were upgrading the server.
Yeah, it's interesting that you refer to them as servers. And I think in all our discussions, I know with Sam and Joe and I, and a lot of other ACNs, we always refer to them as network attached storage or disk stations. It's very interesting that you refer to them as servers. I think clients would probably prefer to hear it called that.
Yes, I would agree. I mean, I think that's probably, you're used to that language when explaining it to clients too, right?
If they even know what a NAS box is, network attached storage to me doesn't sound active. We had headless Mac servers, Windows servers, whatever. We had headless servers before. And this is still a box that is serving their files up to them. So we've always called them servers to the client, whether it's a surveillance station or the file server or an archive or a backup server, because we feel like the client understands that more anyway. It's a thing that has a bunch of storage on it, but it's serving files to you guys.
Yeah, definitely for ease of them understanding a transition, especially if they were coming from Mac OS server, this would help them understand it better. You mentioned setting up the link aggregation on some of these devices to allow for faster throughput. And I think you answered it, though, afterwards about what you do about your backbone of equipment on the network side. So when you're doing this, are you always replacing your switches with 10 gig?
What we're doing in this particular one is it's a full Ubiquiti stack. We're going to put in a 10 gig switch because they have multiple servers. They have a surveillance station. They've got the archive backup. These guys, after some of this stuff, we talk to them about, hey, what's the cost of downtime? Here's $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 to get a second server and put those Synologies in as high availability replica servers. 40, 50 person architecture firm is down for 2 days while a server gets shipped from Amazon or somewhere else. That pays for itself. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4. There's probably 5 different Synologies in that office. So all of those are going to be plugged into a 10 gig switch. All the other Ubiquiti switches are tied together with the 10 gig, SPF ports. We still just have gigabit on each computer. They don't have all new Macs with, 10 gig Ethernet on them. We replace the whole office with a bunch of Mac Minis and 10 gig, right? So we're just putting in right now the link between the servers and the rest of the switches. Now, all the switches are uplinked between each other with 10 gig, but then what's going to each desktop is still a gigabit.
All of these pieces, like you said, all of it leads to the fact that we have to educate our clients and make them understand that these costs are for a reason and not just because we want to spend your money. If you gain their trust, they'll be able to understand that a bit better. If they're a little wary of what you're telling them, you sound like a used car salesman. No offense to all those used car salesmen out there, but they feel like you're taking their money and running. So
here's the other thing. I know you and I have talked about it in email, but I don't think I talked about it last time I was on the show. The other thing we started doing is we have a little survey and a little form for clients to fill out, or we can do it with them when we're in front of the decision maker. Try to always talk to the clients about what is the cost of downtime per employee? Like, what are you paying them? Pick a number. Mm-hmm. They're making $25 an hour or whatever. So for every 15 minutes that they're not working, here's what it's costing you. Now, that's just pure cost of downtime. The other one is, what are you billing that worker for? So you may be paying them $25 an hour, but you may be billing $75 or $100 an hour. So the cost of downtime then is exponentially more because it's lost billing because they're not doing whatever they're going to do. And then we try to ask them, hey, what's the cost of downtime if the whole office is down for a day? Give me a number. Is it $5,000 a day, whatever? All of a sudden, then us being the used car salesman trying to sell them something, that's how we sold the high availability to the architects. Because something happened and they had to send everybody home at noon. Might as well not come back till noon the next day because the stuff's not going to be working. There was some stuff in the network that wasn't redundant, and if they can't get to the server, nobody can work. They just stay home and do email or whatever. And at some point, you're like, what did that cost you? The cost of that second Synology server for high availability, they wrote the check the next day. Get that ordered and put it in place.
Yeah, you certainly can do some convincing once you start
right.
seeing what kind of costs would be involved.
It makes you look like you're working for them instead of trying to take their money, right? Because you're going, here's what the cost of not doing this is, right? So now we're just talking about a couple $100 for an extra hard drive or a 5-bay instead of a 2-bay server compared to those numbers you just help them walk through. In my experience, it changes their perspective of what you're doing. Then you're consulting, you're not selling.
One thing that really intrigued me about this whole conversation, besides the story, because honestly, that did touch home with that. I think all of us can understand that and really empathize and feel like that could happen to any one of us. So I really appreciate you sharing that with us. But the other piece that is intriguing to me that I'll probably hit you up about offline is that Synology data center and how you make that tick. Because ever since I learned about the ability to generate recurring revenue out of services, I'm like, okay, what's the next thing that would be
right?
And not just to build my clients, but something that's relevant to them, makes sense for them. Why not make a buck off of it? So if we take care of them, we should earn money for that. I think personally, I'm very intrigued by that. So I'm definitely eager to learn more.
Tell everybody, too, when you're thinking about that and you're talking to the client about why are you paying me more to do your backups for you or whatever. The other part of that we're working into that monthly cost is we know we're going to have to replace those servers every 3 years and buy more hard drives or whatever. So you want to work your hardware cost into that as well. And when we tell them, when the client goes, well, I can go to Carbonite and get that for a half a cent a month. It's like, yeah, but they're not doing all this other stuff. And you know us and we can drive to the data. Who are you going to call at Carbonite that's going to answer the phone and rush to get your data back? Anyway, just don't forget the cost of recurring, replacing the hardware or expanding it over time. So
here's what I'm thinking, Sam. You, me, and Joe, we start our own data center. Richard could be a silent partner, and we'll clean up here in Connecticut.
We had to move to a full rack instead of we started at a 1/3 rack. So we're paying for a full rack. So we got some empty space. You guys want to buy a 12-bay Synology and ship it to Austin? Let's talk.
Yeah, I can't exactly drive to Austin to pick up the drives for my customer, but I like the idea of...
I can do that for you for a fee. Right.
I guess you'd have to call that low availability then, right?
That's right.
Or no availability server.
No availability.
There's our show title.
I truly, and I can speak for Jerry and Joe, even though he's not here, I truly appreciate you coming on. I do appreciate the time that we've spent talking offline as well. The fact that you wanted to come on and share what could be a painful memory for you is a big deal. I'm used to that, just bearing my soul now on the show. But for you to come on and do that, I think that's appreciated. And I think other people will appreciate it too, so that they can help and learn and grow from that experience that you had. So thank you for coming on and doing that and joining us, Richard. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome, guys. And I appreciate it. And I would urge everyone else to make their Patreon contributions to the show. It is the cheapest form of therapy you're going to get as a consultant. So I appreciate what you guys do for the whole group of us. And always my pleasure to come on and talk to you guys.
Well, thank you. We appreciate you. And you're always, like Sam was saying, so generous with your time and so generous with all the things that are inside your kimono. And we appreciate being able to look and learn things. So thank you again.
You're welcome. And I know what the real thing about hearing that story is hopefully it helps everyone to go, thank God that was somebody else. That was Wingfield and not me that happened to. So have a good one, and everybody wear orange tomorrow and support the Astros, unless you're a Yankee fan, and then you're probably not excited about the Astros.
Well, I'll secretly be rooting for your team for you. But.
Okay.
Jerry does his voices of customers of all kinds.
Am I on the cloud?
Joe spins his deeply detailed yarns all the time.
I have a whole story about this.
Sam is on the road again, phoning in from a hotel.
At least we know where I am.
Half a century combined of Apple expertise right now. Right now. My Mac is slow. Have you tried restarting? Well, the fans won't blow. Have you tried restarting? But my data is gone. Have you tried restarting? I dropped it